Just a weekly reminder not to take yourselves too seriously, and to take a deep breath, sit back, relax, and have a laugh with us. As promised, we're kicking this episode off with playing the long game. As I mentioned before, I grew up playing several sports. In the last episode, we focused heavily on my soccer era, but this time, we're shifting the spotlight to my futsal and basketball eras. If episode 1 was about choosing the harder right, then this episode is about staying the course, even when there's no applause. I started playing both basketball and futsal around the same time, which was in second grade, so I was about 8 years old. I started out playing for my elementary basketball team, and by fourth grade, I was playing AAU basketball, which stands for the Amateur Athletic Union, with legacy. We were in the Gym Rats Association. I played point guard during school ball, but in AAU, I was usually the shooting guard. Either way, I was always more of a defensive player. Defense is all about effort, and I was all about getting scrappy. One lesson that stuck with me ever since is that practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. That's something our AAU coach, Coach Nick, used to tell us all the time. Practice builds habits. If you practice bad habits, they stick. If you practice good ones, they become second nature. Almost muscle memory. Even when you mess up. Coach Nick also used to joke that offense was the best defense, because if you had the ball, you didn't have to play defense at all, which is a concept I also passed down to my futsal teams as well. When I was 11, we traveled to Orlando, Florida for the ESPN Wide World of Sports AAU National Tournament. There was an opening ceremony, and every team brought pins to trade with other teams. It was such a cool experience. We didn't end up winning the championship, but the experience itself was unforgettable. By sixth grade, my middle school team was the best in town. We beat everyone, and it became the first and only time I'd ever got to cut down a piece of the basketball net as a keepsake. We didn't pull it off the next 2 years, but we did it once, and that mattered because our middle school and elementary school merged into an academy my 8th grade year. So we etched that win in the history books in 6th grade because the Stallions and the Jaguars were no more. We became the Royals. Around that time, I stopped playing with Legacy to play for another AAU team that gave me more flexibility to continue playing club soccer. I was on United, coached by former Bengals kicker Doug Pelfrey, and I played alongside his daughter. He was a great coach, and he even helped me with one of my school projects later on down the line. I continued playing basketball into my freshman year of high school, but eventually I had to give it up to focus on soccer. Some of you had that sport that taught you how to work, even if it wasn't the one you stayed with. I'm not very tall, just short and sweet, but maybe not so sweet on the court, just short. So I knew that my chances of playing college soccer were stronger than basketball. Still, whenever I played pickup games in the gym, people always assumed I was on the basketball team, which is ironic because I was actually on the soccer team, a sport that uses the complete opposite body parts. Speaking of opposite body parts, I was 8 when I learned the difference between soccer and futsal, which I'll spell out for y'all, because I know not everyone is familiar with it. Futsal is similar to soccer, but it's played with a smaller, heavier ball. For reference, the largest soccer ball is a size 5, while the largest futsal ball is a size 4. The court is smaller too, which means less space and faster decisions. There are only 5 players on the court at a time: a goalkeeper, a fixo, a pivot, and 2 alas. The fixo is the fixed player in the back and is most comparable to a midfielder in soccer, someone who has to be calm under pressure and very technically sound. The pivot is the pivot player, similar to a striker, who posts up and releases the ball quickly to teammates making runs. The alas are closest to wingers or flank players in soccer. Instead of throw-ins, futsal has kick-ins, and almost every restart has a 4-second rule. Kick-ins, corners, and goal throws, all of it. And yes, I said goal throws because futsal has them in place of goal kicks. 4 seconds means less time to think and less space to operate, so your decisions have to be quick. My main position in futsal is usually fixo, but I can play anywhere, just like in soccer, even goalkeeper. Futsal is technically supposed to be played on a handball-sized court, but in the United States, it's usually played on a basketball court instead. The goals are handball-sized too, which makes finishing much more precise than outdoor soccer. The game also moves fast because there are unlimited substitutions, similar to basketball. That's very different from youth and professional soccer, where once you sub out, you may not come back in at all. Futsal games also tend to be higher scoring because of how back and forth the game is. Again, very similar to basketball. And once a team commits 5 fouls and a half, the 6th foul gives the other team a free kick from the second penalty spot. If someone gets a red card, you're forced to play down a player for 2 minutes or until the opposing team scores, whichever one comes first. Essentially, futsal is a game that forces you to think faster, move quicker, and make cleaner decisions, because there's nowhere to hide. I explain all of that because sometimes the things that shape us the most are the things people don't fully understand. So let me ask you this. Have you ever loved something that felt niche, misunderstood, or undervalued by the people around you? And did you stick with it anyway? Now that you've got a better sense of what futsal is, let's talk about the first time I actually played it, which was with my first select soccer team during the winter time. Since so many practices were canceled or moved indoors due to extreme weather, futsal made way more sense. It let us keep getting touches on the ball without developing the bad habits indoor soccer can create, like relying on wall passes or playing without a true out of bounds unless you absolutely skyrocket the ball into the rafters. We were called the Kingstas, like King's Stars, but gangster. You know, the Kingstas in paradise, if I do say so myself. This was a whole new dynamic for me. At the U9 level, which is anybody under 9, we played 7v7 in soccer, 6 field players and a goalkeeper, which was 2 more field players than futsal. In soccer, we usually played a 2-3-1 formation, 2 defenders, 3 midfielders, and 1 forward. On the other hand, in futsal, we started in a 2-2 box shape, with the fixo diagonal from the pivot and the attacking ala diagonal from the defensive ala. As we improved, we learned how to transform seamlessly from a 1-2-1 on offense to a 2-2 on defense. Remember how I said the canvas on my wall says, "Life is fun. Soccer is serious." Well, futsal is fun. Soccer is still serious. Not that soccer wasn't fun for me. Futsal just brought out a different side. Soccer was about speed and outrunning people. Futsal was about technique and control. You couldn't survive on speed alone. You had to be well-rounded. Not that I was slow by any means, but I'll be humble. There's always someone bigger, faster, and stronger than you. That's just life. My jersey actually said slow me, though, because my favorite lunch meat was salami, which I spelled S-L-O-M-E-E as a kid. You can't blame me for spelling it how it sounds. Salami. My parents thought it was hilarious, but I was convinced it would trick the other team into thinking I was slow when I wasn't. As my little sister would say now, I was trying to be a clever clog. Except she calls it a clever clop, a phrase she learned from Peppa Pig. British slang for smarty pants. Well, kind of. Looking back, this was one of the first times I realized that joy matters. Not everything has to be serious to be meaningful. So ask yourself, when was the last time you did something simply because it made you feel alive, creative, or confident? And are you still making room for that version of yourself today? I really loved my first experience with futsal, especially how small and tight-knit the team was. It reminded me of basketball a lot. So, when one of my speed and agility coaches, Derek Smith from King Soccer Academy, left to start his own futsal franchise, I was all in. The program was called Jenga, updated to the Total Jenga Academy, and is now known as the School of Jenga after a rebrand. They chose the name Jenga because it's a Brazilian term that represents fluid rhythm and confidence with the ball at your feet. And from day one, that was the expectation. Not just skill, but swagger with purpose. One of the very first lessons I learned there was that teamwork really does make the dream work. In futsal, everyone is accountable. If one person decides they're too tired or too lazy to run back on defense, the entire team pays for it. That's why our coaches drilled one rule into us: 4 back and 5. All 4 field players back on defense within 5 seconds. If you didn't make it back, you were probably getting subbed out, not as a punishment, but because it showed that you either needed a breather or you were putting yourself above the team. Another lesson that stuck with me was that attitude is everything. A bad attitude spreads fast. When things get tough, it's easy to point fingers, but that's when leadership actually matters. If someone's already in their head and you add fuel to the fire, they'll spiral down into a deeper hole they can't climb out of. But if you encourage them, that might be the spark that turns their entire game around. We practiced that mindset constantly so we were ready for games and tournaments, not just physically, but mentally. One of the biggest advantages for me, though, was playing with the boys. Boys are typically faster, stronger, and more aggressive. So playing with them at a young age forced me to level up fast. We all know the classic Sandlot line: "You play ball like a girl." Well, I got the opposite. People constantly told me, "You play ball like a boy," whether it was futsal, basketball, or soccer. And that meant being aggressive, fearless, and not thinking twice about sliding in to win the ball in soccer and futsal. Honestly, I'll give credit to my rec coaches for my slide tackling abilities. I vividly remember one practice during a torrential downpour where the goal was simple: get as dirty as possible by slide tackling through the coach's legs to get the ball. I'm sure our parents loved laundry day after that. Back at Jenga, they used to host piladas, which are Brazilian-style pickup games, in the summer at the park under the bridge. Most of the time, very few girls showed up, so I made it a point to be there and represent. And let me tell you, playing co-ed is a different ballgame when you're not a boy. As Beyonce would say, "If I were a boy, I think I would understand." Okay, that's enough. I'm not Sir Mix-a-Lot, but in all honesty, if I messed up one pass, that might be the last time I touched the ball. Meanwhile, the boys would give each other chance after chance. Were all of them like that? No. Some of them respected me because I trained with them consistently and proved myself. But for the most part, I had to earn every single touch. Even during team selection, girls were usually picked last. It almost felt like an unspoken rule, not to pick a girl before a guy. But some of us beat that stereotype by outplaying the boys, plain and simple. Those weekly piladas, summer camps, winter leagues, and tournaments kept us sharp year-round. And more importantly, they taught me how to play the long game, showing up, earning respect, and staying ready, even when no one's cheering you on. This part of my life taught me something important. Your attitude affects everyone around you. So think about this. When things get tough, are you the person who brings the energy up? Or are you the one who drains the room? And if you're being honest, is that the person you want to be? For me, futsal was more than just staying sharp for soccer. It was its own world. Coach John Caldwell and Derek, who co-founded Jenga, gave my friends and I the opportunity to attend our regional ID camps and the U.S. Youth Futsal National ID trials. These were chances to showcase our abilities in front of major names in the futsal world: Keith Tozer, Otto Orff, Dante Garcia, Kevin Jackson, Carlos Cruz, and many others. And for the first time, I felt seen. I'm not name dropping for the fun of it. Every single one of them played a real role in my futsal journey. As a tween, this was my first time trying out for the U.S. Youth Futsal National Team. I made it through regionals and advanced to the national ID trials, alongside a few of my Jenga teammates, which helped because we already had chemistry. I distinctly remember one moment when we sliced and diced up the defense with our weave, similar to a basketball weave, where we pass and follow our pass and make sharp runs. Then me finishing the play off by drawing out the keeper and doing an L skill around her and into the net. I also remember not being afraid to perform a rainbow over one of the defenders, and the coaches being in awe that I tried such a move at such a high-level tryout match, which was much different than the reaction I got from my soccer coaches, being less than thrilled with me trying it in a game. This is why I love futsal, for all the freedom to try everything with finesse and pizzazz. But the scale of it all was still unreal. Players flew into Missouri from all over the country. New York, Texas, Minnesota, everywhere. That's where I met players like Corbin Albert, now Corbin Schrader, who went on to play for PSG and now plays for the Olympique Lyonnais. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but I hope so. Anyways, I also met Brooke Collins, who now plays as a professional goalkeeper for the MASLW, which stands for the Major Arena Soccer League Women for the Kansas Astros. At the time, we were just kids, but looking back, it's wild to see where everyone ended up. 2 of us from Jinga made the team, representing the Great Lakes region, and we got to play against Canada's youth futsal national team on their home turf. Traveling to another country to represent the U.S. at that age was surreal. We played on a regulation-sized futsal court, much bigger than anything we'd ever played on in the U.S. The national anthems played. Our names were announced. We swapped jerseys after. We took team photos and a starting 5 photo like real professionals, even though we were just kids. I don't even remember who won. What I remember is living fully in that moment, playing my heart out, soaking it all in, and realizing that this sport had given me something soccer hadn't: belonging. What sticks with me the most is that futsal was where I felt seen, especially after feeling overlooked in soccer. I continued to make the team consecutively after that for years, but not the trips. Circumstances kept getting in the way. First, my parents weren't comfortable with me traveling alone internationally as a new teenager, so I had to forfeit my spot to Costa Rica. Then, the year after that, we couldn't raise enough money for Argentina. And the year after that, my passport issues kept me from going to Costa Rica. Still, I don't regret staying the course. Eventually, we were going to age out of the youth system, so Coach Otto told us to always stay ready in case there was ever a U.S. women's futsal national team. That team didn't exist until 2025, more than 30 years after the men's program began. Let that sink in. Just because something doesn't happen overnight doesn't mean it isn't growing. When the women's team finally launched, I was finishing up my master's degree at the University of Kentucky, so I didn't get the chance to try out, but I still stand by my choice. Staying another year at UK was choosing the harder right, even if it meant missing that opportunity. Futsal was where my friends and I found family. Outside of it, we all played for different soccer clubs, dealing with politics, roster sizes, and hierarchy. But futsal was home. Smaller rosters, real accountability, real connection. In 2017, our Jenga family dominated the Midwest Regional Futsal Tournament in Akron, Ohio, earning a spot at Nationals in St. Louis, Missouri. We finished second, and honestly, we were furious, not because we lost, but because by that point, the focus had shifted heavily toward developing the boys' teams, while we were pushed to the back burner, even though we'd been there from the very beginning. It felt like the long game we'd been playing suddenly stopped mattering. But that lesson stayed with me. Sometimes you can do everything right, stay loyal, stay ready, and still be overlooked. And that's exactly why playing the long game matters, because the payoff isn't always immediate, but the growth is real. This was a moment where I felt seen, but also where I learned that timing doesn't always line up with talent or effort. Maybe you've had opportunities slip through your fingers for reasons outside of your control. If that's you, I want you to know this: missing one opportunity doesn't erase the work you put in. Remember when I said I wasn't just name dropping all of those prominent futsal figures for nothing? Here's the proof, starting with Coach Kevin. In his prime, he played for the Chicago Fire and the New England Revolution in the MLS. Aside from being a U.S. Youth Futsal National Team coach, he's the owner and director of EFC, which stands for the Elite Futsal Charleston. He remembered my teammate and I from the U.S. National ID camps in St. Louis and invited us to represent EFC at the World Futsal Championships at the ESPN Wide World of Sports in Orlando in late 2017. We learned names quickly, adjusted to EFC's style, because every futsal team has its own identity. And after a few practices, we were ready. It was enough to win the World Championship title against the Australians. Being role models for the younger players watching from the stands was unreal. There was no switching to the dark side like in soccer. This was just a temporary guest role, states away, just for the tournament. When I came home, I was still, and always will be, part of the Jenga family. In 2019, Coach Carlos also remembered me from the U.S. Futsal National ID trials in St. Louis. In his prime, he set many soccer records at his university. Aside from being a U.S. Youth Futsal National Team coach, he's the founder and head coach of the Fort Wayne Phoenix Futsal Team, located in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He invited me to play with Fort Wayne Phoenix Futsal for the Midwest Regional Tournament. Once again, it took a little time to adjust to new teammates, but futsal is a universal language. It was really just about building chemistry and trust. Just like my Jenga team had done a few years earlier, we won the regional tournament. Coincidence? Maybe, but I like to think I was the common denominator. This time, when we advanced to nationals, we won. It was a tight match, but we pulled through in the end. The crowd was cheering, and the younger kids rushed the court afterward. It felt like we won March Madness. That moment, holding a national championship trophy, was unreal. It felt especially meaningful because it was the title we should have won 2 years earlier with Jenga. To top it all off, my stepdad surprised me and finally let me try iFly, which is indoor skydiving, something that I'd been wanting to do ever since I saw it the first time we went to St. Louis in 2015. And again, this wasn't a switch to the dark side. Fort Wayne is still a state away, and in the same region as Jenga, and I was only a guest player for a tournament or two. When I came back home, I went right back to training with Jenga. Sometimes doors open because people remember how you showed up. Not because you were the loudest, but because you were consistent. So ask yourself, if someone thought of you months or years from now, what would they remember? Your effort? Your attitude? Your reliability? In 2020, we fulfilled the prophecy. My friends and I from the original Jenga team, the same core group that fell short at Nationals a few years earlier, decided to shoot our shot at the Midwest Regional Tournament again. This time, though, we returned under a different name, the Futsal Divas. A few of us were really into wrestling, so we borrowed Divas from the WWE's Divas division. Everyone else loved how it sounded, and just like that, the name stuck. Even we had to borrow jerseys from the Cincy FC OVPL, which stands for the Ohio Valley Premier League team, for President's Day tournament here and there. It's literally been our go-to ever since. Although, for this particular occasion, one of our dads even got his franchise to sponsor our kits, and a couple of our dads stepped in to coach us through regionals, helping get us back to nationals once again. We had 5 core players who were always there, and the remaining 2 to 4 spots rotated depending on the tournament. No matter who filled those spots, they were always teammates from soccer, sometimes mine, sometimes someone else's, but the result was always the same. We got the job done. One of our guest players that year was Corbin Albert, who we'd met at the U.S. Youth Futsal ID camps. She was in the age group below us at the time, but once the older group aged out, we eventually overlapped. She came in from Chicago while the rest of us traveled from Kentucky and Ohio. 3 of her families pitched in to rent a Mercedes Sprinter van, a full-on party bus, 2 TVs, a privacy window, and our dads driving up front so they didn't have to hear the chaos happening in the back. We rolled into the parking lot driving in laps, manifesting that this was our tournament. Because let me tell you, if we had to ride 9+ hours home in silence again, it would have been the longest drive of our lives. We played our hearts out. Our dads coached us all the way through nationals, and this time, we won it all. We celebrated the entire ride home like we just won the Super Bowl. We were just missing the diamond-studded rings. We even made it to the Claremont Sun local newspaper in our hometowns. That championship proved that what we had known the whole time. If we'd been given the same attention and the investment the first time around, the outcome could have been very different. This is proof that when people believe in you, and when you believe in each other, things change. Think about your inner circle for a second. Do the people around you push you forward or hold you back? And are you being that person for them too? After a coach was relieved and a new one was brought in for the 2021 season, I decided to step away from playing soccer at West Point. I wanted to see who I was without the constant pressure of being an athlete. What I quickly realized, though, was that stepping away from soccer didn't quiet my love for futsal. If futsal had been a collegiate sport, I would have chosen it over soccer in a heartbeat. I've always felt that futsal is its own standalone sport, one that's wildly underrated. And I wanted to share it with the world. So I tried to make it official. I set out to create a West Point futsal club. I wrote a 13-page memorandum, secured 3 recommendation letters, and went through the full approval process. Still, it wasn't enough. The academy felt that we already had enough clubs, even though Navy, our biggest rival, had significantly more. It was disappointing, but I don't regret my efforts for a second, because sometimes the work matters more than the outcome. And my work didn't disappear. This was one of those moments where effort didn't equal outcome, but it still mattered. If you've ever poured everything into something and still been told no, I want you to remember this. The work you do is never wasted. It's just preparing you for a different door. In 2022, Futsal Flair was born. I took the memo I originally wrote for West Point, translated it into civilian terms, and added a non-discrimination statement. And just like that, the University of Kentucky Futsal Club became official. Starting the club also forced me to sharpen my networking and marketing skills. We began with the bare minimum, 3 members, and by the time I graduated in 2025, the club had grown to over 100 members. I also single-handedly raised over $2,000 through various fundraisers and scheduled friendlies using the futsal connections I'd built over the years. The first time we played at Jenga away, we actually beat them 10-8. After that, they definitely handed it to us. A big part of that was consistency. Their roster stayed the same, while ours was constantly changing. School schedules, graduations, and travel made it hard to always bring our strongest lineup. Still, I was grateful they made the drive to Lexington so we could have a home game too. Hosting was a whole operation. I borrowed folding chairs from one of my tailgate jobs so spectators had somewhere to sit. I secured at least 1 referee, stocked beverages to sell concessions, booked the courts ahead of time, and taped down new lines so we could play on a proper handball-sized futsal court instead of a basketball court. I also had to brief the university about the event and create promotional materials to get people to show up. As the founder and president, there was a lot of administrative work on top of the hands-on responsibilities, planning training sessions, organizing matches, and making sure practices were both productive and fun. It was exhausting at times, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. It shaped me into the leader I am today. One of the biggest challenges was leading a team that was mostly men. I was often the only woman, and while I tried to recruit more girls, some didn't feel comfortable consistently playing against boys. When I graduated, I passed the officer positions on to men. Not because I wanted to, but because it was the most realistic option to keep the club alive. And honestly, that's still a win, because Futsal Flair is still kicking today in 2026, living on beyond my time at the university for future generations to come. Leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes it's borrowing chairs, taping lines, sending emails, and showing up when no one's watching. So ask yourself, are you waiting for permission to lead? Or are you already doing it in the ways that matter most? One of the coaches from Jenga eventually split off to create his own rival futsal club. I stayed loyal to Jenga, but I did train with him privately a handful of times. Those sessions were pretty expensive, so I couldn't do them often, but I took advantage of every opportunity I could. I also signed the UK Futsal Club up to compete in his tournament each year, which it came with a small discount. It wasn't as big as Jenga's discount, but it was just enough to make it possible without completely breaking the bank. We never won that tournament, but the experience was invaluable. We were playing against top-level competition, and that exposure raised the standard for everyone in the club. You can't grow if you're only comfortable winning. On the flip side, we did finish second at the Jenga tournament in 2023, and I was incredibly proud of that result. We had 0 substitutes, not one. Every single player was running on fumes by the end, but we pushed through anyway. That tournament felt like a true reflection of the work we'd been putting in behind the scenes. No shortcuts, no excuses, just staying the course, even when the tank was empty. Progress doesn't always come with trophies. Sometimes it comes with second place, exhaustion, and knowing you gave everything you had. And honestly, that kind of growth lasts longer. In 2023, Coach Dante remembered me from the U.S. Futsal National ID camps in St. Louis. In addition to coaching for the United Futsal NTC, which stands for National Training Camp, he is also the director of Columbus Futsal. He invited me to play with them in the National Futsal Premier League, which is the NFPL. I'll be honest, this one did feel a little like switching to the dark side. Columbus and Jenga are both based in Ohio, and the men's teams played against each other. My heart still wanted Jenga to win, but if you're wearing a jersey, your loyalty has to match the name on your back. That said, Jenga didn't have a women's team competing in the NFPL. Their focus had shifted more heavily toward the boys and men's side, so if I wanted to play at that level, this was the opportunity. It wasn't easy. I was driving 3 hours from school some weekends just to play, but in a weird way, that made it feel even more real. Like I was a pro commuting for games, managing school, travel, and performance all at once. This season also marked a major shift for me position-wise. Our goalkeeper school had strict rules that prevented her from playing consistently, so I stepped in as the full-time keeper. And just to be clear, I had never been formally trained as a goalkeeper, but I paid attention. I watched keeper coaches. I listened. I studied tendencies, both to understand how to beat goalkeepers as a field player, and now how to become one myself. Maybe having practiced hand-eye coordination with basketball helped me, or even being on the University of Kentucky club dodgeball team. But what ended up being my secret weapon was that I wasn't a traditional keeper. Since I was naturally a field player, I could drop the ball to myself and step into the attack as a fifth attacker whenever the moment called for it. Most goalkeepers don't play that way, but futsal rewards creativity. By the end of the season, I earned the Golden Glove Award, and honestly, that might be one of my favorite awards I've ever received. I beat out goalkeepers who had been playing that position their entire lives, when I had never even considered myself a keeper. It definitely made me wonder, should I have been playing goalie this whole time? I'm kidding. Well, mostly. I even saved a penalty kick that season, which still feels surreal. Seeing the game from that perspective completely changed my understanding of futsal. One of the most full circle moments came when my Portuguese teacher from West Point made it to one of my games. She had settled in the Columbus area, and it was close to her home. We both left the United States Military Academy around the same time to pursue new paths, and somehow we ended up there, watching the next futsal game together. It felt like one of those moments where life quietly reminds you that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. This part of my journey reminded me that sometimes your biggest strength is something you never planned for. So think about this. What hidden skill or perspective do you have that you haven't fully owned yet? I'll dive deeper into my time at UK and my full Disney College program experience in future episodes. But for now, wherever you're listening from, whether you're driving, walking, or laying in bed, I want you to think about the last time you planted the seeds of hard work and finally got to reap the fruits of that effort. Ask yourself, was it worth it not to give up? And as I wrap up this episode of Playing the Long Game, I want to leave you with a few words of wisdom. Be the best version of yourself, not just for you, but for those looking up to you. The sky's the limit, so don't sell yourself short. Don't just set the standard, be the standard. The hard work will pay off eventually, even when it doesn't feel like it in the moment. So keep pushing forward. Every single day is another opportunity to get better, so don't waste it. If there's one thing I hope you take away from all of this, it's that staying the course matters. That's a wrap for this episode of the Collegiate Chronicle. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you got a good laugh, learned something new, or maybe just felt a little more prepared for whatever college throws your way. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Got a wild college story or a topic you want us to dive into? Hit us up on social media or drop us a message. We might just feature it next time. Until then, stay safe, have fun, and remember, college is as much about the journey as it is about the destination. Catch you next time!